take it away from here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much. This is Joni Schwager. I welcome everyone to this session on mindfulness. Mindfulness is something that people feel can change their lives. I looked up the definition, and what it said is mindfulness is maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and surrounding environment through a gentle, nurturing lens. Again, I'm Joni Schwager. I'm a white cisgendered female. I have salt and pepper hair. I'm 64. You can decide if I'm middle-aged or older, adult, senior. And I'm wearing a black and white striped top. And my background, I have a fan going on above me. I hope it doesn't make anybody dizzy. So we have been working with Stephanie Romero for a number of years. She started Awaken Pittsburgh, and I know she's going to tell you all about it. But just to say that Stephanie's a very interesting woman, and we're really delighted to have her. She has really taken mindfulness. Pittsburgh has really gotten into mindfulness, I think, because of Stephanie. Maybe that's my prejudice maybe, but nonetheless, whenever the word mindfulness comes out, it doesn't matter who's talking, Stephanie's name is always attached to it. So Stephanie's going to do a presentation. I know we're going to do some activities. I will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to ask your questions, and we will ask them to Stephanie when the time comes. So if I can turn it over to you now, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Joni. So I can introduce myself just a little bit. I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh, and I am a white middle-aged woman. I have wavy to curly brown hair a little bit below my shoulders, and I wear glasses. And right now I'm seated in my home office. So behind me, folks can see a window and a door, a blue wall, and a television on one side of me, and some cabinets. So I'm going to share my screen, and let's hope everything works like it did when we practiced. Hopefully that's visible to all of you. And most of the screen sharing that I'll be doing for folks that might not be able to see it is just text, but when there is a graphic, I will try to describe it for you. So starting off is just the title that I came up with for today, which is Mindfulness for Mental Health and Well-Being. And I will talk a little bit more about the nonprofit as we go along, but to get started, I thought it would be really wonderful to start with a practice, since we want to be interactive and it's also a mindfulness presentation. So this practice is called anchoring attention, and the picture is of a boat with a rope to an anchor on it could be a lake, it could be the ocean. It's not clear which it is in the picture. And so as Joni mentioned, in the definition of mindfulness is some sort of quality of attention in the present moment. And the way we direct that attention is very important. And so we'll try that out now for just a couple of minutes. So the first thing is to just notice your position in your body. And if you could just come into a position that feels dignified yet relaxed, whatever that means for you. It could be shifting slightly or it could be not. This is more an attitude than an actual physical embodiment. So whatever position for you feels dignified yet relaxed. And the idea for this practice is we're going to use something as an anchor. And I would like for you to bring to mind something that brings you joy or a sense of pleasure, maybe gratitude. Could also be a feeling of calm or security. So just take a moment to bring that thing to mind. It could be a person, a place, a pet, maybe the smell of your morning coffee or tea, anything that comes to mind that brings you joy or that you feel gratitude for or makes you calm. And whatever comes to mind is fine, but just really imagine that thing. What does it look like, feel like, smell like? How does it make you feel? And so really noticing in your body as you rest attention on this calming thing in your life. What does that feel like? What is the emotional quality? What are the physical sensations that come to you? And we will just rest our attention there for just another moment. And at the end of that, I will ring a chime to bring us back together. And if your mind has wandered, no big deal, simply coming back to that thing that brings you joy or calm. Thank you so much for trying that with me. So that's an example of a mindfulness practice if you've never done one before. And as we go along, we'll do a few more, but it was good to start with one. So I appreciate you doing that with me. So I just want to set up the problem right now. And for me, the problem is that we're experiencing a mental health crisis in our country. We know that this is affecting children. 1 in 5 children has a diagnosable mental health condition. In college students, 41% in 2020 were diagnosed with depression. And almost 50% of adults will experience some sort of mental diagnosis or illness in the course of their adult life. At least 85% of all of those folks, right, actually don't ever receive treatment. And this is in part due to access, but it's also in part due to stigma. And just to kind of connect this to our actual experience in the moment, COVID-19 has actually exacerbated this surge of mental health challenges, as have the social unrest and economic challenges of the past year. And we know that mental health challenges prevent people from thriving, and they also are a huge factor in violence against self and violence against others. In relation to disability, mental health diagnoses are among the most common causes of disability. In any given year, that means almost 10 million adults who have a debilitating mental health issue. Neuropsychiatric diagnoses are actually the leading cause of disability in the United States. And unfortunately, these folks that are suffering from mental health challenges often find themselves having suicidal ideation, which right now in 2019 was the 10th leading cause of death among adults, which equaled 47,500 folks. And it's actually much worse for adolescents. It was the second leading cause of death in 2018, which was nearly 7,000 young people. On the flip side, many adults with other types of disability still experience frequent mental distress. So a 2020 study found that adults with disabilities had more mental distress than those without, and that equaled 32.9% of the folks with disability, or roughly 17.5 million people. So whether you want to think of mental health challenges as a disability, which they are obviously, or just the mental health toll of having a disability, mental health issues are very important to think about in relationship to disability. And so why is this something that a mindfulness provider is talking about? So at Awaken Pittsburgh, our vision is actually a region, a Pittsburgh region, but we could expand that to global, where people are actually in touch with their inherent worth and have the ability to cultivate confidence and dignity to help us all have a more just and enlightened world. And we enact on this vision, we help create that vision by bringing mindfulness-based social and emotional regulation skills to people who are experiencing trauma, high amounts of toxic stress, or other types of dysregulation. And this is all trauma, toxic stress, and dysregulation, part of what I would say are mental health disabilities. I myself am committed to this because I was actually a middle school teacher for about 15 years. And I realized a few things as a middle school teacher. One, that my own meditation practice transformed me personally, increased my compassion, and allowed me to be more skillful in self-regulation. But it also totally transformed the way that I worked with the most challenging students that had more needs. And I wrote a dissertation on mindfulness in schools and realized that mindfulness-based social and emotional regulation practice can actually interrupt the school to prison pipeline. So we'll talk about that in just a minute, a little bit more. But basically that's why I founded Awaken Pittsburgh, because at that time, no one in Pittsburgh was really trying to do the work of bringing mindfulness and meditation to help support humans in better self-regulation and more fulfilling, complete lives. So my vision is not just on the individual level, but also to support those individuals so we can be transforming the systems that we find ourselves in. So let's shift a little bit to disability in schools, because that's, kind of where I began. So we know that in 2018-19 school year, right, 14.1% of all students that were in schools in public education qualified for special education services under the Individuals with Disabilities Act. So I'm not going to read all of the different types of disabilities, so it's all different kinds of disabilities, but just to highlight that only 0.7% of the total disabled population in schools are classified with emotional disturbances. So just keep that in mind for a second. And of course, IDEA includes a whole range of disabilities, anything that could qualify, right? So that little percent, that 0.7% of all school children that have kind of emotional disturbance as their disability is so small, such a small sliver, and doesn't possibly explain why students with disabilities, any disability, are more than twice as likely to receive an out-of-school suspension, 13%, when they're compared with students without disabilities. Only 6% of them get suspended, right? So what's going on? Why are educators suspending kids with disabilities at twice the rate as students without disabilities? And so again, I noted that 0.7%, because you might want to say, oh, well, it's those kids that have the emotional dysregulation, but it's not. It's not possible that 0.7% of the population is going to account for that difference, right? And then it gets worse when you start to look at intersectionality, because a quarter, 25% of African-American boys and 19, so almost 20% of African-American girls that have disabilities, of that whole group, they receive at least one out of school suspension in 2011-2012, which is the most recent statistic I could find. And so there's some kind of connection between disability and school suspensions. And the research is very, very clear that when kids get suspended, they're put on the school to prison pipeline, which basically is saying that once kids get suspended, they're much more likely to end up in criminal systems, juvenile justice systems, right? So this is determining life outcomes for these kids, and kids with disabilities, unfortunately, are more represented in the school to prison pipeline. The other kind of thing that we notice is that teachers, care providers, and parents of kiddos with disabilities have higher rates of turnover if it's their job, higher rates of burnout, stress, and anxiety. And families of folks with disabilities also experience higher rates of depression, divorce, and economic hardship. So we're looking at this whole kind of situation of mental health challenges for folks with disability and the folks that care for them. So now I want to kind of come back to the idea of mindfulness and help us start to understand how does mindfulness play a role in helping with this situation and what all we can do. So I'll share a definition that I love for mindfulness, which is similar to the one that Joni shared at the beginning. And it is paying attention to what's happening right now. And that includes our mental events with curiosity, openness, and acceptance. And so there's a little graphic on this slide, which has mindful, comma, or mindful, question mark. And there are some stick figures, one that has a bunch of clutter in their mind, and the other one that is just noticing the surroundings. So the idea is that when you're mindful, you're really in the present moment. And it's not just that you're noticing what's happening around you, but you're also noticing your physical response, your thinking, and you're also in touch with what's happening with the other person. And so to unpack the definition a little bit more, you do have a curiosity and openness, which is not deciding right away that you know what's happening. Maybe having this idea of curiosity if someone appears to be angry, like, are they angry? What could they be angry about before we decide we know that? And then the acceptance piece is, I would say, not a moral judgment at all in any way, but more about the opposite of denial. So I'm sure we've all had the experience where something happens and we just don't want to deal with it. So we have some sort of denial that kicks in. This is the opposite of that. It's like, oh, this is what's happening. This is what's real. So I would like to get an example of another practice, and then we'll take a little pause for questions before we move into how mindfulness can support us. So let's do a breath-focused awareness practice. So sometimes when people hear the word meditation, this is the thing that they think about as meditation. So I thought it would be a good one to try with you all. And so again, whenever we do a practice, we always try to assume a posture that is dignified but relaxed, whatever that means for you. So if you could take a moment if you need to adjust your posture. And we did that anchor practice at the beginning of the presentation. So if at any time, whatever I'm suggesting doesn't feel like a comfortable focal point for you, which we'll be noticing our breath, if that doesn't work for you, you are totally invited to bring back that anchor, that thing that made you feel happy, joy, that you were grateful for, and focus on that instead of the breath. If the breath is accessible for you, then that's great. Then you can follow my instruction. So if you would, and if you're able to take a few little bit deeper or more conscious breaths to just notice how breathing feels in your body. And again, if that doesn't feel right for you, please return to whatever your anchor was in the beginning practice. So just noticing what feeling the breath is like, and kind of choosing a spot in that feeling of breathing. It could be the air coming in your nose, the feeling in your throat, the rise and fall of the belly or chest, but wherever you want to kind of rest attention on the breathing. And it could be tracing the whole cycle of breathing as well. So whatever spot feels right to you, just under the outside of your nose, air coming in and out of the nostrils, the throat, the rise and fall of the chest or belly. kind of locate where you want to place attention. And so we're going to rest our attention there and just noticing the body breathing. And whenever our mind wanders, which inevitably it does, just notice that. It's not a big deal. That's what the mind does. And then just simply bring it back to focus on the body breathing. And so I'm going to time us for about 2 minutes of just focusing on the breathing, right? And as many times as you need to, notice you got distracted and bring it back. And then at the end, I will again ring the chime to bring us back. Great. So I'm going to pause at this point in the presentation and invite anyone who has questions on the kind of statistics that I was sharing about the relationship between disability, mental health, and kids and the school to prison pipeline. If you have any questions about that, the definition of mindfulness, or the practices that we've done so far. So please feel free to pop any questions in the chat. And maybe while folks are doing that, I can say that on the slide that we have up for the meditation practice, I forgot to describe the picture. It's a very peaceful scene. It looks like a lake surrounded by forest, and it's a sunrise, I think, with like a pinkish orange sky being reflected in the lake with what I think are geese. They look too big to be ducks, but I think are geese kind of swimming on the lake. So great. Any questions, comments?
So Stephanie, this is Joni again.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that nothing has come through the chat box from other folks, but I do have a question.
Sure.
And before I start my question, and I'm sorry, I did not thank Disability PA for taking on mental health as one of the issues that they think is important to look at around disabilities, because in my experience, when people talk about disabilities, they only talk about physical disabilities. And as with your statistics, obviously there are a lot of people that have mental health disabilities. So I want to thank you for that, because we've been trying to send that message for a long time. So thank you to Disability PA. I also see that you put your website, Stephanie, in the chat. Thank you. www.awakenpittsburgh.org. And also the link to Disability PA, and also the link to Staunton Farm Foundation, which I forgot to tell you, that's where I'm from. I was so excited about this session. I just went through, I skipped half of it. Staunton Farm gives mental health grants in 10 counties in southwestern PA. So my question finally is, you said violence against self. What does that mean?
Yeah, so especially in kids, and I think it's a little more prevalent in girls, it could be cutting, self-harm, a variety of self-harm kinds of behaviors, right? So that would be one example of violence against self, right? So that is definitely concerning, and something that has come to the fore of behaviors and issues for kiddos, right? I think it's something that doesn't get talked about quite a bit, as much as maybe it could be. Yeah, great. Well, if there aren't any other questions or concerns that are coming up for people, we'll keep going, and I'll pause another couple of times. Sorry, I see the chat. Can the slides be available? Yeah, I can. I don't know if the summit is sharing out people's slides, but if they're able to do that, I'd be happy to do that.
Yes. Hi, this is Vicki. If you send them to me, I can make them available to anybody who needs them.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm writing a note because I'll forget. Getting in my groove of presenting if I don't write it down. Great. So moving right along. So why am I talking about all of this, kind of laying out this problem and sharing these statistics? And it's really that mindfulness has actually been beneficial to folks that are experiencing these issues. And so I like to frame mindfulness as brain training. And in the corner of my slide here, I have a little image of a brain who is lifting weights. And so I really like to frame mindfulness to people to think about it in terms of exercise, because if you think about physical exercise, if you go on a multi-mile run once a month, that is not going to give you the biggest bang for your health buck, so to speak, right? And mindfulness works the same way. So when we talk about mindfulness helping, what we're actually talking about is a pretty close to daily practice that people start to bring into their lives. And usually we don't see any kind of statistically significant shifts in well-being, and we'll talk about those measures right now, until folks have been practicing for a good 8 to 9 weeks. So having said that, it's mental exercise, and it actually does change not just your mental state, like how you're feeling, but it also changes the structures of the brain. So this is all fascinating. I'm not going to get totally into the brain anatomy and neurophysiology, but for me, this is fascinating because now they can do MRIs of the brain and fMRIs of the brain, which actually show the brain working, and they can see changes in not just the mental state, but the actual gray matter. So for me, that's really amazing. And this correlates with these things that we're going to talk about right now, which is a decrease in stress reactivity and lower blood pressure. So for example, the parts of the brain that control stress, the amygdala, actually change after mindfulness practices, right? And this also includes increased relaxation, self-compassion, and increases in social relationship skills and actually just connections to people. We also see that when folks are depressed and they bring in a mindfulness-based practice, their mental state is improved. And so just to be really clear, I'm not saying to do this instead of any kind of therapy. it's in the studies, it's in addition to. So I don't want someone to be like, I can quit therapy and just do mindfulness. Please don't hear that. The other really wonderful thing is that the places of the brain that are kind of known to be responsible for compassion and empathy and executive control regions of the brain all change in a way that shows that they're developing or growing. And so that kind of explains that we actually have more compassion, more empathy, and more executive control, which is like less reactivity, just to kind of explain that. The other thing, and I love this study, is that people have a better immune response. And there was this study on the flu shot. So let's just explain briefly how this works. So there's all the participants in the study, and people get randomly assigned. They're either going to get a meditation experience or some other social interaction. We can just, I don't remember what this particular study did. Let's make it up. Let's say they get a knitting circle. So they're going there, they're interacting with people, and they're doing something that they somehow enjoy. And then after however many weeks of the intervention, they all get a flu shot. And then they draw blood from the people and they measure the immune response. So the antibodies in their blood. And the meditation group is statistically significant, higher levels of immune response of the antibodies, right? And this has been replicated in other studies of not just flu shots, but other immune diseases. So for example, psoriasis is another study that was done, and people had significant improvement by bringing in meditation or mindfulness. And then the final one I'll mention is that just generally positive psychological functioning is enhanced through mindfulness practices. So for me, this is all really exciting because not just are people self-reporting that these things seem to get better for them, but there's actual physiological studies now, either by looking at blood or brain scans, that are showing what you feel is actually real in your physical experience in your body. And just locally in our own research, we look at stress reduction, workplace satisfaction, and so that's like burnout, secondary traumatic stress, general quality of life of people, indicators of mindfulness, and also when we work with educators, the classroom behavior. And we see improvements in all of these areas across the board. So we like to say that we're generally supporting people's mental health functioning and well-being. So why does this work? So this is the question, right? I'm saying, oh, mindfulness. Why? How does this actually work for us? So just to take a little glimpse of how this might work is we all naturally have something called the fight, flight, freeze response. And so this is from the ancient history of our being human, right? In animals, we see this in animals too. Something big and scary happens. And in old times, it was actually the saber-toothed tiger that wanted to eat us. And our body, our physiology kicks in mostly through cortisol and adrenaline to either have us kind of fight the thing or hightail it out of there, right? And the third option, freeze, is like kind of stand behind the big tree and see if it won't see you and pass by, right? And so this is our stress response nowadays. So for example, you may not be encountering the saber-toothed tiger in your life, I hope not, but maybe it's an email from that person that always just rubs you the wrong way that you work with. Or it could be, you know, even a memory could trigger this now. And so the difference is in the moment when you have the saber-toothed tiger in front of you, you get to run or you're fighting it. And so the stress hormones are kind of worked through the body. They work their way out because they're doing their thing. But when it's an email, and it's an email that maybe happens repeatedly, or even we can take from a social justice perspective, racism and constant experiences of racism. We now know that poverty, living in poverty, could also be reaching this level for people. When it happens over a long period of time, it starts to affect your health and your mental health, physical and mental, in so many different ways, right? So many different ways. And so what mindfulness does is when you're starting to have the fight, flight, freeze response, You can notice it because it's increasing your ability to be fully present in the moment. And you can choose a different response, and you can also de-escalate, right? And so we're going to take a look at how does that actually work. So there's a man named Dan Siegel, and he developed something called the window of tolerance. And so there is a graphic on the screen that I'm going to talk through. In the center of the graphic is our comfort zone. And this is where we feel completely emotionally regulated. We're able to self-soothe, we're able to calm ourselves, and we have free choice of our responses, right? When that fight flight response gets kicked in, we become what's called hyper-aroused, and that's on the top of the window. When we freeze, that's the response, we become hypo-aroused, which is like shutting down completely, the freeze response, and that's on the bottom of the window. The thing that happens though is that comfort zone for some people, that middle part where we're able to regulate and self-soothe, for some people, it's really wide. They don't get pushed out of that comfort zone very easily. But for other people, the comfort zone is very skinny and small. So, someone that's very reactive, someone that has, there's expressions in English like being really thin-skinned, right? So some people, their ability to self-regulate is very limited compared to other people. And some of this is just naturally through biology. Some of it is experiences of trauma and traumatic stress, right? PTSD, and other mental health challenges can make it really difficult for people to have a larger comfort zone in the middle of that window. Other neuroatypical kind of experiences where you have difficulty gauging situations might also be a factor that could push you out easily out of your window. And so what we know is that mindfulness practices can help us from a hyper-aroused state or a hypo-aroused state come back into that comfort zone. And because we have these kind of brain changes over time, right? We end up getting to build our habits, right? Getting to build the neural pathways to allow us to be able to return more and more quickly to our comfort zone. And therefore, we're expanding that comfort zone over time, right? So I'm going to just take a quick pause because that's a lot of information. So any questions about the fight, flight, freeze, how mindfulness relates, and this kind of idea of the window of tolerance. And we're going to do some practices now to get some examples.
I can always ask a question if nobody else
Go
has one
for
right
it.
now. I was curious to know when is the best time to practice mindfulness? How often should you do it in a day? For how long? Like, what's the right dose
Yep.
for it to affect you? As somebody mentioned, the physiological changes in your brain.
That's right. So great question. So as I mentioned, usually people don't start seeing the real benefits until at least after 8 weeks. And in our research, when we start a program with folks, we try to do 9 weeks with people. Just because we know that sweet spot is around 8 weeks. And also you're trying to form a new habit. And so it's always hard to get that going in your life. So we always try to get people just start with 5 minutes a day, right? But by the end of our program, we want them to be at around 15 or 20. And the research is all showing that 15 to 20 minutes a day is enough. Like all you really need is 15 to 20 minutes a day. Again, the regularity of the practice is more important than doing 2 or 3 hours once a week. That's not going to give you the bang for your buck necessarily.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then also I was curious to know, and I may be aging myself, but what's the difference between transcendental meditation or TM and mindfulness?
So great question as well. Sometimes in these presentations, I have something that's called the tree of contemplative practices. I didn't put it in this one, maybe I should have. But basically, if you think of the tree as all of the possibilities of mindfulness practices, transcendental meditation is like one branch. So it's just one way to do a practice. Transcendental meditation became very popular because somehow a lot of famous people do it, but it's basically repeating a mantra. So you get a mantra and you just repeat the mantra, repeat the mantra, repeat the mantra. And if you remember our definition or even the practices we did, I tried to give you a focal point for your attention. So the breath was one of them. The thing that brings you joy was one of them. In this case, with a mantra, the thing you're paying attention to is the mantra. And it works exactly the same way. Your mind gets distracted, you just bring it back. Some people find it easier if they're verbalizing something to hold that attention, right? But the practice is the same. You're just saying the thing. And there was actually an experiment where somebody used the word one, O-N-E, right, as a mantra in an experiment, and they had just as much effectiveness as any other mantra. So it's just, you're building your mental capacity for paying attention, noticing when you get distracted, and bringing it back. And so if you want to, like, you can tell, like, I could talk about this all day, but if you want to connect this now to the fight, flight, freeze thing that we were just talking about, right, and building your mental muscle. So think about something enters into your mind that freaks you out and pushes you out of that comfort zone. It could be a memory. It could be a thought about something you're fearful of in the future. It could be anxiety. The ability to notice that as a distraction and bring your mind back to the present moment is actually the same skill as focusing on your breath, noticing that you're suddenly doing your grocery list and bringing yourself back to the breath, right? It's the same skill set. Noticing my mind went off and bringing it back, right? And so it's basically building that muscle of the brain, right? So whether it's transcendental meditation, working with a mantra, or any other technique of that, it's going to be the same. Yeah. Any other questions about all that? All good questions. Great. Then I'll continue. So I just want to give you a little kind of visual with my hand of how this works in our brains. And so I'm making a fist with my hand, and my thumb is tucked under my four fingers. And then the four fingers kind of bent over my thumb. That part is like right behind my forehead and is considered the prefrontal cortex, right? So if I place it next to my head, you can kind of see there's the prefrontal cortex right behind. The thumb underneath is representing what's called the limbic system, right? So this is where our emotions are. So like it's sometimes called the reptile part of the brain, okay? And then the wrist coming down is our actual brainstem going into the spinal column, right? So what happens is that when we're calm, when we're in that comfort zone, the prefrontal cortex, which is our higher level thinking, our ability to be rational, and like counting is a function that the prefrontal cortex would let us do. All of that's happening here, and the emotions are underneath. So when the fight, flight, freeze kicks in, this little thumb part, this limbic system takes over, and the prefrontal cortex can't talk to it to make good decisions, right? So Dan Siegel, again, the same guy that did the window, says it's like flipping your lid. So that prefrontal cortex is no longer engaging. And so what our goal is that can we just notice that that's going to start to happen and keep that prefrontal cortex talking to that limbic system so that we can make decisions that are from a place of calm and not reactivity. So when I work with teenagers, sometimes I say, how do you know that you're angry? And one young man said, I know I'm angry when I punch someone. And so there's a kiddo that doesn't notice that they've totally flipped their lid, right? They've totally noticed. So there's a question I'm seeing, do you mean it doesn't help until 8 weeks? So in my programs, when I teach the mindfulness classes, people start reporting that they feel better around 3 or 4 weeks, but doesn't help, meaning they don't see changes in the brain that they can measure through the MRIs and kind of statistically significant changes until around that 8 weeks. So I think, every person is different, so I'm not going to make a promise for any individual, but some people report it earlier, but the kind of research in the field doesn't show a lot of statistically significant change until that kind of period of time. I hope that made sense to you. Yeah, okay, great. So let's talk about connecting the window of tolerance and the practices that we did. How do they help keep us in the window? Right? How are they going to help keep us in the window? So let's think first about hyperarousal. So hyperarousal, again, was that feeling of flight, I need to get the heck out of here, or fight, right? Like I'm being challenged, I'm gonna have to fight this creature, person, whatever it is, right? So that feeling, you're so angry, you're gonna get them, right? So what's the thing that could help us de-escalate and get back into the window of tolerance? So breathing techniques, and particular breathing techniques, and sensory grounding techniques are two ways. So I'm going to guide you very quickly through a series of practices that could be helpful for you when you're hyperaroused. And I also want to just mention again that this is brain training. So the more often you do these practices, the easier it is for that kind of neural pathway, I think that's the way I want to say it, to kick in, right? And so it's like lifting weights. If one day you go to lift something really heavy, it's going to be really hard to do it. But if you've been lifting weights regularly, then you're going to go to lift the heavy thing and it's a lot easier, right? So let's do a technique that I call finger breathing. And this is great for kiddos, but it's also great for adults. It's really wonderful because it helps you focus on your breathing in case it's hard to focus on the breathing, but it brings in the physical sensation of breathing as well. So you can hold out one hand, and what you're going to do is with your other hand, you're going to trace along a finger. Now, if that's not available for you to hold your hands out and trace, you can move your finger along anything or any kind of tactile sensation. Coordinating it with your breathing is really the important part here. So anything you can do to have a physical sensation that you coordinate with your breathing. And I'll just mention here, the actual practice of yoga, right, is to coordinate movement with breath. So yoga practices are often building that kind of neural pathway as well. It is one of the branches of the tree of mindfulness, right, that we mentioned before. So if you're able, you can take your index finger of the one hand, and as you breathe in, you're going to trace up on one side of your thumb, and then you're going to come down the other side as you breathe out. And then you're going to keep going with the index finger, breathing in up the side of the index finger, breathing out down the other side of the index finger. Right? So I'm going to let you give that a try. Why don't you go through your fingers or whatever it is that you're able to have as a physical sensation to coordinate with the breath. Just give it a try for another moment. And what I find is if you can do that, let's say for 2 hands, so 10 times, you really start to feel a bit more settled. Right? The other practice does not involve the breath at all. So if the breath is not available to you in any given moment, just feeling the sensations of your body in contact with something. So for example, your feet on the floor, and that could also be your feet in the shoes that you're wearing or socks. It could also be your legs and bottom in the chair, your back against the chair, your arms on the arms of the chair, you know, whatever physical contact sensation that you feel, to really just feel it. And so let's just take a moment and just really notice whatever's available for you to explore in sensation. It could be, as I said, your feet on the floor, the feeling of yourself seated in the chair, just really explore the sensation. So I'm barefoot and I have my feet on a low pile carpet. And so I can feel kind of the nubbies of the carpet, the texture, the feeling of the kind of yarn of the carpet. And maybe for you, there's a temperature, like if your feet are feeling warm, or maybe the floor is cool, whatever temperature there is, texture. So just noticing that. And the idea here is that any physical sensation and any sensory experience has to happen in the present moment. And so that will automatically bring you back. And so working with folks that have a out of the window of tolerance hyperarousal experience, you can also just have them name things in their sensory perceptions at the moment, like name 3 things you see, 3 things you smell, 3 things you hear, 3 things in your physical kind of touch kind of sensations. Anything like that is great for hyperarousal. Great, and then I want to just guide you through one more breathing technique that is really specifically wonderful for hyperarousal. So when we have hyperarousal happening to us, our blood pressure automatically escalates, right? So we know this in our experience. When you feel nervous or agitated, your blood pressure goes up. And what we know through research is that somehow when we breathe in, it raises our blood pressure, and when we breathe out, it lowers our blood pressure. So this is part of the normal variability in our blood pressure. So if we can extend our exhale longer than our inhale for maybe a count of 5 or 10 breaths, we will automatically start to lower our blood pressure. And interestingly enough, once we get that blood pressure down, heart rate goes down, and the prefrontal cortex then starts to get reconnected because we're dismantling that physical flight response. So let's give that a try. And the way that I usually work with this is I count as I'm breathing. So I'm breathing in and I count how long it takes me to breathe in. So, breathe in. That time I got to an 8. And then you pause just a little bit, maybe for a count of 3 or 4. And then since I got to an 8 on my in breath, what I'm going to try to do is do 50% longer on the out breath. So that would be 12. Does that make sense to everybody? So let's just try. So breathing in, let's say I get to count 8. Pause for 4. And then breathe out slow, 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 slow. And even like pushing until I feel like really there's no air in there until I get to a 12. So go ahead and try that for a minute or so and just feel what it feels like. Okay, one more. So I'll just take a pause. Any questions about those few different practices around hyperarousal? Questions about hyperarousal and de-escalating with some quick practices. And I'll just say that that breath counting that we just did is what I always do before presentations. All right, so I'll just trust that you all were trying it. Mm-hmm. Great. All right, so then the flip of that is the hypoarousal, right? So that means you feel like you're shutting down. Sometimes we hear people say dissociation in that case, right? It could be not being able, for folks who experience depression, not being able to get out of bed kind of feeling. And so this hypoarousal really needs us to upregulate. So hyperarousal, we're trying to calm down to come back into our window. But the hypoarousal, we're trying to rev it up to come back into our window, so we're functioning again. And so one of the things that we can do is really, really easy. It's body tapping. So this is bringing us back into the physical experience, and it's also a little bit energizing. So I'm going to invite you to do this with me, just however you're able and wherever you're able on your body. I'm just going to start at the top with my fingers, the tips of my fingers, and I'm just going to lightly tap on my forehead and head. And I'm just going to work my way down my face, throat, sternum. You just work your way down. You can do your legs. And then if you want, you can do just the light tapping, but you can also do like full palm patting. So any kind of just, it's kind of like getting the blood flowing kind of feeling, right? So body tapping or patting. And so this is like an energizing kind of feeling. Movement practices are great. So when I work with little kids, we do something called swinging trees. Swaying trees, we pretend that there's wind and we just put our arms straight out and we kind of just flow back and forth with the arms. You can do it standing, it's better. And we have, you know, with little kids, it's a lot of fun. We can pretend like, oh, it's a tornado or it's a light breeze, you know, and you can match your movement to the strength of the wind. And so that's an up-regulating kind of activity. The sensory grounding techniques that we tried for hyperarousal, where we felt the feet on the floor, that we're naming the senses, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, you know, all of that can also help, but they're not quite as invigorating as the movement or body tapping kinds of techniques. And so, you know, those traditionally would not be categorized as mindfulness practice the same way that that breath focused awareness is. But if you think about what you're doing is you're bringing yourself out of this hypoaroused state, which is not necessarily in the present moment, and you're helping push yourself into the window of tolerance in your comfort zone where you're able to be fully present and respond from a place of self-regulation. Great. So that is the window of tolerance and some techniques to use with it. So I would just check in with folks and just see any questions now. And then I will kind of give you some advice for how to practice. And then I would like to end with another short practice after another little bit, if that's okay for folks. So any questions on the window so far? Quiet group.
Stephanie, could you talk a little bit about, I've recently read, maybe this is old data, but that emotional pain is, and the effects on your body is equal to physical pain. So it's like pain is pain, whether it's something that's physical or something that's emotional. And I wondered if you could talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I'm just, when you're saying that, I don't know that I've read that statistics necessarily, but I have a friend who is a person that works with people who are grieving, you know, and just thinking about the pain of grief, of losing a loved one and how immobilizing that is, and how, yeah, you know, in the same way that if you have a high fever or if you injure yourself, that you're going to be immobilized for a little while. Like, I absolutely believe that that's true, that really, really intense emotional experience, painful emotional experience, has to be cared for. We need to kick in our self-care practices and tend to ourselves to help ourselves move through those. So yeah, I don't doubt that.
Well, thank you. And I see a question. Many of your techniques require, mobility, and what if,
I think they're trying
what
to
if you have thank you.
Yeah. So
Mobility.
so the clearly the movement and the tapping require mobility. So I would say we were working with someone that really only had movement from the neck up, and they were still able to do practices with their facial expressions. So if that's a possibility for you, that's great. If that's not, I think that you can still become more aroused through the sense perceptions. So what do you, if you have sight, what do you see? If you are able to hear, what do you hear? If you have taste, what do you taste? And so really, all of these different options can bring you back into the present moment. And even for people who do have mobility, certain movements might not do it for you, and it might be certain other ones. And so I always say when we do our classes, there is a kind of smorgasbord of practices available to people, and you really have to kind of feel through what's going to work for you, and whether that's because you have some physical limitation or people who have trauma. For example, I was teaching a class and was leading a breath focused practice, and there was a person in the room that had had a strangulation experience. And of course, for that person, there was no way that focusing on the breath was going to be possible because it was too triggering for them. And so breath practices might be really great for someone, for a lot of people, but for some people, it's totally not available. So you're going to have to kind of experiment with what is possible for you. I know that most people, many people find that the breath practices and working with the breathing are good. You can actually do breathing for if you're hypo-aroused, for upregulating. So I'll just give you an example. In yoga, there's something called Ujjayi breath, and it's a revving up breath. So you breathe in and you kind of constrict your throat and you kind of rasp it breathing out. So it's like, right? And that kind of breath where you're constricting your throat and like forcing your breath out from a constricted throat, if you're able to do that, that might be enough to upregulate you as well. So working on, it's almost like the opposite of the breathing we did, to calm, right? Something that could upregulate you. But yeah, thank you for that question. Other questions? Give it another second. Okay, so Joni before had asked, like, how do you start? How do you know how long to practice? What do you do? And so I just wanted to give some advice, if I can, about how to begin a practice if you don't have one. So as I said before, you really want to start with just 5 to 10 minutes a day. And people often ask me what time of day. I'm a morning person. I get up early, so I always do my practice in the morning. I've tried to practice in the evening and I end up falling asleep. And then usually in the middle of the day, I'm just way too busy. So I forget, because I have too much going on. So, but you have to figure that out. I had another person that I worked with, actually a few, that said when they come home from work, it's really great for them to do the practice just then because they had really stressful jobs and it was just what they needed to help them transition from the stress of their job to their home life without kind of bringing that stress into the home, right? And so that's a beautiful thing. One of the teachers I worked with would sit in her car in the driveway for 5 to 10 minutes before she would go in the house. Another person that I worked with was a fireman, and that can be a really stressful job. He just needed it when he got home to decompress. So that, finding that it's an experiment that you'll have to kind of go on to see where your sweet spot is. Morning, evening, middle of the day, whatever works for you is fine. There's no best time. It's your best time. Again, starting with 5 minutes. And then once you find your time, your 5 minutes, and then just slowly try to increase it. Maybe you have a couple of weeks at 5, then you go to 10. And that sweet kind of spot in the research is really to get you to around 20, right? If you can do more, fantastic. And sometimes, like I feel such a benefit from my practice that I try to do more. But honestly, some days I just don't have the time, right? My average is, people always want to know, what do you do, Stephanie? My average is probably around 30 minutes a day. That's what I usually do. And then I try to do longer periods as often as I possibly can. But there are some days where it's 10 to 15. Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is sometimes Monday through Friday are really easy for me because I have a more set schedule, but then the weekends, I can kind of lose it sometimes. So you'll have to work around how you fit it all in. And then I will say that there are great resources out there. I use something called the Insight Meditation Timer. It's available on phones. It's available on the computer. It's free. As with most things, there is like a part you can pay for, but they have a little timer part. So let's say you want to start with 5 minutes, you just set it for 5 minutes. It'll ring a chime at the beginning and a chime at the end. You can set it for just the chime at the end. It has a lot of options if that's what you want. So Insight Meditation Timer is one I recommend. The other thing that it has is it has guided practices. So for example, if you really liked having my voice kind of telling you what to do and reminding you, then you can actually use that. You look up like 10-minute practices, or look up even if a topic, right? You can put in anger and find practices around anger, just as an example. There are lots of things online anymore, especially since the pandemic. There's sitting groups, there's all kinds of online supports. I'm hoping that in-person supports come back soon. I know Awaken Pittsburgh is just starting to venture into doing some in-person things if everyone's vaccinated. There is on my website, which I posted in there, a place to sign up for our newsletter. We also have some resource lists on the website that you can access. And then the other piece that I would say is, and again, remember, this is all this mind training, right? All mind training is pick one activity every day that you do, a tiny activity like brushing your teeth or when you're preparing food. Don't have the radio on, don't be on your phone, just completely focus all of your attention on the activity. And if your mind wanders to doing some planning, thinking, whatever, just bring it back. I'll just give you like the quality of the difference of that. So, we all brush our teeth and it's a little bit mindless, I would say, right? It's autopilot. I was told a few years back that my gums were starting to have a problem, and the dentist was like, it's because you're brushing your teeth wrong. And I was like, what? I'm like 40 something. How am I brushing my teeth wrong? I've been brushing my teeth all my life. I had a little bit of an attitude about it. And he's like, Stephanie, it looks like you're doing saw, 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 saw. And you need to do little circles, little circles, little circles. And I was like, okay. So imagine the attention that I paid when I brushed my teeth that evening, right? The quality of attention of how I was brushing my teeth. And he was right. I was doing saw, 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 saw. So I had to switch it up and do little circles, little circles, little circles. So that's the quality of attention I'm talking about. Really noticing what you're doing, how you're doing, and what it feels like, right? Great. So any questions about getting your own practice started? Anything at all for folks? And then we'll do I have a question slide, but then we'll do a quick closing practice as well. Anything else?
Yes, Stephanie, so of course I immediately go to the App Store and try to find it, right? Okay, probably half the people here did as well. And there are a number of apps. One is the Headspace.
One is called Insight Meditation Timer.
I see it. Okay, it's a second one. Insight Timer Meditation app.
Yep.
Perfect.
And it has like a little gong, I think, is the picture. At least it does on
yes.
Yeah. Someone is. Okay, so I got a direct message, and you know what? I'm gonna put my email address here. If you want to connect with me individually, it's sromero@awakenpittsburgh.org. So I'm just gonna pop that in there. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to hop on a call with anyone that wants to talk through anything at all. Any other questions? And then we'll do a closing practice. Going once. Going twice. Any questions at all? I'm hoping I'm not missing any up here. Someone else saying they love the tips and the Insight Timer. Great. So another practice that I love is a gratitude practice. So I first wanted to thank you all for your attention and coming on the call and just listening to me this whole time. I appreciate that a lot. And so one of the ways that we can kind of recharge our batteries and also kind of increase our mood and the level of happiness that we have in our life is our gratitude practice. So if you've not done a gratitude practice before, I would just invite you right now to think of one food that you're grateful for. One person that you're grateful for. And it may not be anyone that you met. I mean, it might be, it could be a family member. It could be someone in history that did something amazing. So just a person that you're grateful for. And a place that you're grateful for. What about an object that you're grateful for? It could be anything from your house. We had a plumbing issue some time back, and I became really grateful for indoor plumbing when our sewer line had an issue. So, you know, it could be something just really basic. And then anything else that's coming to mind that you want to add to your gratitude list. And so just thinking about, we now went through 5 things, right? A food, a person, a place, a thing. And just really noticing how you feel when you think about these things. How do you feel when you think about these things you have gratitude for? We're going to just take a moment, and hopefully you have some positive feeling from doing that gratitude practice. And we're just going to extend it out, and we're going to send a wish for other people, whether they're on this call or in our local area, to just experience a person to be grateful for, a food to be grateful for, a place to be grateful for, things to be grateful for. So we're just going to extend that out. And this is a kind of compassion practice. We wish that other people would have these wonderful things or something similar to be grateful for in their life. We're just extending that out. Great. So thank you all so much. I can hang out for a few more minutes in case anyone does have any questions. And if you want to unmic and chat with me for a few minutes, that would be great too.
Stephanie, I want to thank you. Oh, go ahead.
We can't. Can you sort of tilt my screen forward?
Yep.
The cat is getting in the car.
There.
Good.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Mark.
I'm Mark, and I'm here with MC Cuddles. We were enjoying your presentation, and I wanted to let Vicky and everybody else know that Cuddles would make his Cuddles would make an appearance during Disability Pride. So here he is.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing Cuddles with us.
You were talking about mindfulness, and Cuddles is my service cat.
Mhm.
He taught himself everything he knows. I only taught him about 9 treats, but Cuddles relaxes me. He can be like on my lap, and I can be holding him like this, and before too long I'll be falling asleep.
Yeah, I think pets are wonderful for that. In fact, I have, you might be able to see them. I have 2 dogs that hang out with me all day. There he is. And they have the same.
But I assure you, I did not fall asleep during your presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Have a great day. And thank
You
you.
too.
Ooh, somebody doesn't sound happy.
No, Cuddles.
Does anybody else have any questions, comments? One of the things I wanted to do is make sure that, Joni, if you could just give a little more information about your organization.
I would be happy to. The Staunton Farm Foundation is a family foundation. It started in 1937 by a woman who did not have any children and made a lot of money in oil, southwestern PA, and saw alcoholism and I believe depression among maybe other mental illnesses in her family. And she did have a farm, which is why it's called Staunton Farm, where she wanted people after her death to be able to come to her farm and get rest and relaxation and sunshine, and then be able to go back to their regular lives. So this is the 1930s. There were not the medications that we have today. So this was what I might call a more mild mental illness. And her first husband passed away. She married their family physician, and in the 1930s had him sign a prenuptial agreement. Fast forward, she dies before he does. And of course, he contests her will. But because of the prenup, that held, and her family was able to then start the foundation. So we give grants in 10 counties in southwestern Pennsylvania, and they are all either mental health or substance use related grants. And it is a pleasure and an honor to be able to do that job. I've been here for about 23 years, and I have to say this is one of the best presentations I've been on. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think I learned a lot. And one of the things I wanted to end with was that I think for me now, mindfulness, I'm going to be able to sort of define as the opposite of denial. So thank you all. Anybody else have any other things they want to share? I think everybody's email and or websites are posted. Thank you all for doing that.
Yeah. Thank you, Joni. That was a huge compliment.
I didn't fall asleep either.
That's great.
Thank
That's
you,
great.
Mark.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay,
Great.
well, if there aren't any more questions, but you can put them in the chat. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for presenting all of this information, for just filling my brain. Like, I want to look at your presentation again at that big slide, because like it just had so much information. I think it's really helpful. Like, meditation we can make it accessible for anyone. Oh, puppy.
Yeah, this is Leonardo. He's also asking for some snuggles. Oh. He did fall asleep during the presentation.
You're probably glad about that, though.
He's very relaxed, like we all should feel right now after this.
That's right. That's right. I will just say, if anyone wants citations for any of the data, like I do have them all in my notes in my PowerPoint. Most of it is from the CDC, NIH. Like that's where most of the data came from for this presentation. You know, all Googleable. But if anyone has any follow-up questions around any of that, I'm always happy to. I hate to put it all in the slides because they become so cluttered, but it is available if anyone needs that or is interested in following up.
Awesome.
I know you do a lot of training, Stephanie. Can people, if they have a group that they would like to get trained, are you available to do that?
Absolutely. So we work with individuals who just can join freestanding programs through the website. We usually post them on our website, but yes, we do all kinds of educational institutions, therapeutic institutions. We've worked with addiction recovery groups, and Joni's organization has funded a lot of our work. We've also worked with businesses, high stress workplaces, We are beginning to work with first responders. We've worked with a whole variety of different kinds of groups and individuals.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just put it back into the chat. So if you want to
Great.
get to learn more, you can go to their website at awakenpittsburgh.org. Thank you again. Awesome presentation. Really, really helpful, I think, for anyone. Anyone can benefit from mindfulness. So later today, Disability Pride PA, virtual PA continues. We have at 4 p.m. Biden Cares Plan and HCBS, What's in It for Us. So come check out that panel. It's going to be advocates with disabilities talking about the Biden Cares Plan and like what that means and kind of exploring those realities of what it looks like. And then at 8 p.m., we have a virtual concert with House of Edge, Seamus Kelleher, and Four Wheel City will be closing it out. So highly recommend joining us for that. It's going to be a really good time, and they're always awesome performances. Like Four Wheel City kills it every time. Like, yeah, please come check it out. And House of Edge is like our Disability Pride house band. Yeah, so come check us out, disabilitypridepa.org. Thank you so much.